K2. Unlike Everest, which draws hundreds of guided expeditions every season, K2 remains wild, unpredictable, and brutally dangerous. Most known as being one of the hardest, if not the most difficult 8,000-meter mountain to climb. Every year, a few expert mountaineers flock to its slope in the hopes of reaching its ever-exclusive summit. One has to face immense dangers: avalanches, high altitude, steep slopes, technical challenges, slippery ice, hidden crevasses, unpredictable weather, you name it, and K2 has it. The 2025 climbing season has been brutal for not just K2, but all the surrounding peaks. It has been as deadly as ever, but not in the way most expect. The Karakorums, the mountain range that houses K2, is facing new threats that are considered abnormal. Rising global temperatures have stripped away protective snow and ice from the roots, unleashing deadly barrages of rockfall onto the lower camps. As the snow melts, loose rocks tumble down the slopes, destroying anything in their path with significant momentum. This year on K2, those dangers claim 2 lives. Chinese mountaineer Jing Guan and Pakistani climber Iftikhar Hussain, both struck down by forces no human could have anticipated or escaped. This is their story. Standing at 8,611 meters, K2 is the second highest mountain on Earth, yet many consider it far deadlier than Everest. For every 4 climbers who reach its summit, 1 has died trying. Due to its remote location on the border of Pakistan and China, just trekking to base camp is a challenge in itself that can take up to a week. The unpredictable weather proves to be a challenge every year. Winds sweep climbers' feet out from under them. Sudden whiteouts and freezing temperatures that can drop to minus 60 degrees. The likelihood of making it down alive if caught in a storm is next to zero. Unlike Everest, K2 doesn't have wide, steady slopes. Instead, it is a pyramid of sheer rock, towering ice walls, and treacherous ridges. There are many technically challenging traverses when attempting the summit, which is why only high-level mountaineers are allowed to climb. But what makes K2 truly terrifying is its exposure. Almost every route involves climbing steep slopes directly under cliffs or seracs, where avalanches and rockfalls are a constant threat, the most notorious being the bottleneck, a narrow couloir which is overhung by a massive serac, located in the death zone, only 400 meters from the summit. Traditionally, snow and glacial ice glued the mountain together, stabilizing loose rock. But as the climate warms, those natural bonds melt away. Without that ice, cliffs and ridges shed boulders like rain. These rocks can weigh hundreds of pounds, accelerating to lethal speeds as they tumble down the mountain. On K2, this problem is most severe on the lower slopes, the route between base camp, Camp 1, and Camp 2. Climbers describe hearing whistling sounds, stones slicing through the thin air before slamming into tents, ropes, or gear. In 2025, over half of the expeditions left frustrated, unable to attempt the climb due to bad conditions, and had to call off their attempts. The lack of snowfall and extended drought caused climbing conditions below Camp 2 to be mostly rock. Many had to climb back, but there were a few that found an extremely tight window in early August, with just enough snow to cover the slopes. One of these climbers was Jing Guan, a skilled mountaineer from China. Driven by passion and determination, she was an active individual. She was a yoga instructor and had previously summited Everest, providing her with enough experience to attempt the savage mountain. She would join the Imagine Nepal team, led by legendary mountaineer Mingma Sherpa. To say she was in good hands is an understatement. Mingma, up until 2024, had been the youngest person to climb all 14 8,000-meter peaks, but still holds the record for the fastest time to climb Everest in K2, which he did within 62 days. He is also one of the 10 mountaineers who made the first winter ascent of K2. He was an expert in the mountains, and even he did not like the conditions 2025 brought. There was hesitation to climb. The expedition was almost called off because of the lack of snowfall. Certain areas particularly were hazardous to traverse, like the house chimney, a narrow, short vertical passage at 6,600 meters, not far from Camp 1. But the most feared section this year was not the bottleneck, or really any high-altitude traverse. It was the steep section between Camp 1 and the Goodwin-Austen Glacier. At times, it was a shooting gallery of falling rocks. It was unpredictable. If you were caught there was little chance of survival. But the team was patient, waiting for Mingma to determine if the conditions would allow a climb. High-altitude porters who had been monitoring the conditions and bravely setting up lines as high as Camp 3 were sending reports to those below. Supplemental oxygen was strategically placed along the route in case the mountain allowed the mountaineers to climb. Late July brought bad weather, which stalled all attempts to go any further, but it also brought snowfall and cold temperatures. It was the sign they were looking for. There was a slight improvement in early August, and an optimistic forecast began to emerge. This encouraged climbers to make their way up to Camp 2. The Imagine Nepal team began to climb. They had completed acclimation trips already, and at this point were just waiting for a weather window. Jingguan was among them. They had to be quick, as it was estimated their good fortune would not last long. Yes, rockfalls had been the main fear in the lower altitudes, but now that they were climbing, avalanches or intense storms could be deadly. It took a few days to reach high camp. Led by Mingma, they chose their steps carefully. On August 11th, the team woke up well before dawn. They left high camp with a buzz in the air. Jing was excited. She didn't know if they would ever make it to this point this year, but the day had come for their summit push. It was dark as they made their way to the top, but the high serac under the bottleneck could be noticed anywhere. It loomed over them as they prayed the snow would hold. Step by step, they passed it and were in the final stretch. All their hard work, the patience, the risks taken led to this moment. They stood on top of the second tallest mountain in the world. Only 4 expeditions were brave enough to attempt the climb. A total of 39 people reached the summit that day. The satisfaction was immense. Mingma had led his team to their goal in an unlikely climbing year. Jing had now successfully summited Everest and K2, a feat few mountaineers will ever accomplish. They were on top of the world, but any mountaineer will tell you, reaching the top is only half the battle. All the dangers they face while climbing, they would have to reface. Descending is quicker than ascending, but some consider it to be more dangerous. Mountaineers can be more careless as their goal has already been reached. The thrill of the chase is now gone. Now you have to get off the mountain alive. Once they were all settled, Mingma began preparations for the journey back. The sun was up, but they were too high in altitude to feel any heat. They rested for a few minutes before starting their trip down and walking on the summit ridge, passing the bottleneck and continuing down the mountain. All things considered, things were going great. Not only had they summited, but they were making good time down K2. Step by step, they moved closer to the base camp. They went as far as they could, but it had been a tiring day, and they could not descend the entire mountain in one day. They stopped for the night and rested. The next day, they continued their descent. Yesterday, the expedition was riding on the high of reaching the summit, but today, everyone was nervous. They would have to descend to the lower camps, and the rockfalls had only continued. Jing kept pushing for most of the day, and as the sun began to set, the expedition would successfully traverse the house chimney as they made it back to Camp 1. All that was left was the last section, the Goodwin-Austen Glacier. It was now nearing 10 p.m., and the team was almost back to base camp. That's when it happened. A whistling sound in the wind. There was no time to prepare. It happened in an instant. Jing got slammed by a rock falling down the mountain. It was unpredictable and deadly. It took a moment for the others to realize what had happened, but ultimately, there was simply nothing anyone could do. They took cover and made sure it was safe before making their way to Jing and confirming the details. The expedition would relay the information back to the authorities, and a rescue operation was kicked off. Recovery on K2 is always complicated. The slope is unstable with more debris threatening to fall. Teams risked their own lives to reach the fallen climbers. After days of efforts and one of the rescuers getting injured himself, the conditions held up enough for them to retrieve her body and return her to her family in China. However, this was not the only incident on K2 this year. Just a month prior, when conditions of rock falls were at their worst, a high-altitude porter for Pakistan, Iftikhar Hussain, was working to prepare the mountain for the upcoming climbing season. High-altitude porters are paid by the expedition leaders to trailblaze the mountain, carving out the routes, setting up fixed lines, and stashing gear along the way. Some will go as high as the summit to make sure the expedition's routes are set and ready for the mountaineers. In all cases, they are mountaineers themselves, as some would say. They take on the highest risk of all. On July 18th, Hussain and 3 other porters were returning to base camp after working in the higher camps. There was little snow, and more rock was exposed than in recent years. Around 12:30 p.m., the men were descending when a rock slide was triggered above them. The other porters scrambled to get out of the way, but Hussain was swept off his feet. It was brutal. He did not make it. A ground team was immediately dispatched from base camp, but sadly, there was nothing they could do to save his life. It was all too late. The other members of his party were devastated, but were unscathed. All members made it back to base camp as they paused operations in the mountain for a few days to gather themselves. The tragedies of 2025 are not an isolated incident. Just 2 weeks before Jing's tragedy, 2-time Olympic gold medalist Laura Dahlmeier of Germany was descending on Lila Peak, a 6,069 meter in the Karakoram range next to K2, from the summit with her partner. As she was rappelling, a rock fall was triggered and struck her. She also did not survive. For their families, the deaths of Jing Guan, Iftikhar Hussain, and Laura Dahlmeier are more than statistics. They are personal, devastating losses. Their stories highlight a truth often overlooked in headlines. Every climber on K2 is not just a number, but a person. Their deaths are also a sobering reminder. Mountaineering is changing. The risks are evolving, and even the most skilled climbers are vulnerable to forces far beyond human control. K2 has always been called the Savage Mountain, but in 2025 it revealed a new face of savagery. Not in storms, not in avalanches, but in the silent collapse of its very foundation. The Savage Mountain has claimed many lives before, and it will claim many again. But with each loss, we are reminded of how both the beauty and the brutality of high places. And for those who still dream of K2, the question always remains, is the summit worth the risks?